I was born the eldest of 4 children, but I never quite understood what it meant to care for someone until it was too late. My name is David Williams, and I've always been driven by the pursuit of success, business, money, status. Growing up, I witnessed my mother's sacrifices. She was always there for us after Dad passed away. But after my wedding, I was caught up in my own life, my own responsibilities. My wife and I built a life together, and in the chaos of daily routines, I failed to even notice how my mother, once a pillar of strength, was slowly deteriorating. In hindsight, I realize I began to take her for granted, believing that she could handle things on her own. After all, she was a strong woman, wasn't she? She had always been there, always holding it together. But now, as I look back, I realize I had failed to hold her up when she needed it most. There were many times she called me, asking for help, but I brushed her off with excuses, telling myself that I was too busy, too wrapped up in my own life to pay attention. When the news came that she was seriously ill, I was too stunned to react. And yet, despite my shock, there was a part of me that had already begun calculating what would happen to the family estate. The money she had saved, the home she had built, the legacy she had left behind. I knew she had a sizable inheritance. In a twisted way, my thoughts went straight to that. I was too late to give her my time. But I wasn't too late to secure what I thought was rightfully mine. I arrived back at the family home. Not out of genuine care, but out of a sense of obligation. My brothers, James and William, had also returned, but only because the family's financial matters loomed large over our heads. My wife and I, along with James and his wife, all walked through the door, all pretending to care, pretending to be the loving children who had come to care for their dying mother. But deep down, we were all here for one reason: money. I saw the frailty in my mother's face, her once vibrant eyes now dull with age and sickness. She lay in bed, her breath shallow, yet still trying to maintain a semblance of strength. Her body had become a fragile shell, and I couldn't help but think how much time had passed since I'd been there for her. All the years I had taken for granted, believing I could always come back to her. But it was different now. Lucy, my younger sister, had been the one to stay with her. She was the only one who had always been there, the only one who truly cared. I watched her quietly as she sat by the bedside, holding our mother's hand. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the deep weariness of someone who had carried a heavy burden alone for far too long. Yet, even now, she didn't ask for help. It was only then that I realized how little I had done. As the days passed, I noticed something unsettling. All of my brothers, our wives, pretended to care. We sat in the living room, making small talk, telling stories of when we were kids, all while eyeing the family's wealth. My brothers and I, we had always been selfish, focusing on our own needs and ambitions. And now, with my mother's impending death, all of that selfishness came to the forefront. I wasn't the only one who thought this way. James and William, my 2 younger brothers, had the same attitude. We all took turns being by her side, but only to appease her, to put on a show. For the others, it wasn't about love or connection. It was about what we could gain. Lucy, on the other hand, had no ulterior motive. She stayed because she loved her mother, because she wanted to make sure our mother was cared for in her final days. I had no shame in admitting that I wanted a piece of the inheritance. But I didn't think twice about the emotional cost. What would it matter if we played our parts well, showed our love for her? After all, it was just a matter of time before she was gone. But when Lucy confronted me about our actions, telling me that we were betraying her and Mum, I didn't listen. I was too focused on what I would inherit to hear her out. She begged us to stop pretending, to stop playing this game. She said that our mother's love wasn't for sale, that we couldn't buy her trust with our false kindness. But I ignored her, dismissing her as being too naive, too innocent to understand the importance of securing what we deserved. The day my mother passed away, I was by her side, but my mind was elsewhere. Her deathbed was a stage, and I was playing my role. I whispered to her that everything would be fine, that we would take care of the family. But I wasn't promising her anything about my love or devotion. I was promising her nothing more than empty words. And then, with a faint whisper, she spoke, her voice barely audible. David, please remember that nothing in this world is worth more than family. Don't let greed destroy what we built together. Don't let it tear you apart. Those words haunted me. She knew what we were doing. She knew that we had failed her in the most important way. But it was too late to turn back now. I couldn't erase the years of neglect, the years of not being there for her. She passed away quietly, and I stood there, frozen, as my family gathered around her. The grief was real, but beneath it, there was something else: guilt. The kind of guilt that gnaws at your soul, the kind that doesn't go away. Even when you try to move on. When we finally got our hands on her will, everything changed. Lucy was named as the sole heir to the estate. Everything our mother had worked so hard for, everything she had sacrificed for, was left to her. We were all stunned. It wasn't what we expected, but it wasn't just the money that made me feel the weight of my mistakes. It was the realization that, in all the years I had known my mother, I had never truly known her. I had never truly loved her in the way she deserved. Lucy, my younger sister, had been the one who saw our mother as more than just a bank account. She had been the one who truly cared, and now, she was the one left standing as the person who would honor our mother's legacy, the person who would carry the torch forward. I could only stand there, silent, watching, as the others reacted with anger and bitterness. My brothers, James and William, were furious, their faces red with rage. But they had no one to blame but themselves. And I too felt a deep sense of regret. I had failed my mother in the worst way possible. The weeks following my mother's funeral were the darkest of my life. I tried to move on, but the grief never left me. The house, once filled with my mother's warmth, now felt cold and hollow. I couldn't escape the guilt that followed me wherever I went. I had always been the one to lead, the one to take charge. But now I felt powerless, helpless, and lost. I kept thinking about the moment when Lucy was handed the inheritance, the way she stood there, calm and composed, as if she had already known what would happen. There was no anger in her eyes, just a quiet sorrow, as if she had already mourned the loss of the family I had once known. The look on her face haunted me. She had given so much to care for Mum, and yet it was her who was left to carry the weight of our mother's legacy. James and William, too, were not immune to the shame of their actions. We had all been so eager to claim the inheritance, but none of us had ever considered what our mother had wanted. None of us had truly understood what she valued. It wasn't about money or property, it was about family, love, and respect. I tried to call Lucy several times, but she never answered. She didn't want to talk to any of us. I had already betrayed her trust, and now, the silence between us seemed to be the only thing left that made sense. I tried to bury myself in work, in the things that once gave me meaning. But no matter how much I worked, no matter how many meetings I attended or deals I closed, the weight of my actions remained. It felt as if my mother's spirit still lingered in the house, watching over me, reminding me of everything I had failed to do. I knew Lucy had every right to shut us out. She had been the one to carry the burden of taking care of our mother. She had been the one to truly understand her needs, both physically and emotionally, while I and my brothers were too busy chasing our own lives. Lucy had stayed quietly doing what needed to be done. The truth hit me with such force that it was almost unbearable. I was not the man I had once believed myself to be. I had been so obsessed with success and wealth that I had neglected the one thing that truly mattered, family. I had lost my mother's trust, my siblings' respect, and now, Lucy's love. What was left for me? I decided to visit Lucy, despite the fear and shame that gripped me. I knew I had no right to ask for forgiveness, but I couldn't go on like this. I had to try. I had to make things right. The walk to Lucy's house felt like an eternity. I kept imagining what I would say, how I could possibly apologize for everything I had done. My mind raced with a million thoughts, each one trying to prepare me for the conversation that was about to happen. But nothing could have prepared me for the look on her face when she opened the door. There was no anger in her eyes, no words of reproach. She simply stood there, as if she had expected me. "David," she said softly, "I've been waiting for you to come." Her words cut through me like a knife. She knew that, despite everything, I would eventually come to realize my mistakes. "I'm sorry, Lucy," I said, my voice breaking. "I was wrong. I should have been there for Mum. I should have been the son she deserved. But I wasn't, and I can never take that back." Lucy stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. We sat down, and for the first time in years, I truly listened to her. She didn't need to say much. She simply told me about the years she spent taking care of our mother, about how she had watched her slowly fade away, knowing that none of us were there when she needed us most. "You don't have to apologize, David," Lucy said, her voice steady. "You've already done enough damage. I'm just tired. Tired of pretending that everything is okay. Tired of watching you all pretend that you cared." Her words struck me like a punch to the gut. I had failed not only as a son, but as a brother. As a man, all the success I had accumulated, all the money and status, had amounted to nothing in the face of real love and family. "I don't expect your forgiveness," I said, tears welling up in my eyes, "but I will do whatever it takes to make it right." Lucy nodded slowly. "It's not about making it right, David. It's about understanding that sometimes things can't be fixed, but we can learn from them. And maybe, one day, you'll be able to forgive yourself." The weeks that followed were filled with moments of reflection. I found myself returning to the family home, looking through old photographs of my mother and our family. I remembered the times when she used to hold me close, telling me that I was her pride and joy. But I had failed her. I had let her down in the worst way possible. James and William tried to reach out to me, but I didn't want to hear from them. They were just as guilty as I was, and their apologies felt empty. What had we all become? A family torn apart by greed and neglect. Was there any chance for us to heal? I began to question everything. What did I want now? Was it the inheritance, the money that had once consumed me, or was it the chance to rebuild the family we had once been? Lucy was the only one who had stood by our mother until the very end. She was the only one who truly understood what it meant to love and care for someone unconditionally. It was time for me to let go of my pride, my ego, and everything I had worked for. I had to rebuild, not the wealth or status I had once sought, but the relationships that had been shattered by my own hands. I continued visiting Lucy, offering my help in any way I could. I tried to make amends, though I knew it would take time. I knew I had no right to expect immediate forgiveness, but I wasn't going to give up on trying. One day, I sat down with her and asked, "Lucy, do you think we can ever be a family again? Can we fix what's broken?" She looked at me for a long moment, and then, with a small smile, she said, "I don't know, David, but we have to try, for Mum, for what we used to be." Those words gave me a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with time, we could rebuild. Perhaps, with time, I could forgive myself. But I knew that nothing would ever be the same. My mistakes had cost me dearly, and I would have to live with that regret forever. But I could still change. I could still learn to be better. In the end, maybe that was the only redemption I would ever find.
The last time I had stepped into this house was over a year ago. I never thought that my next visit would be under such somber circumstances. The news came like a sudden blow, one that took me off guard despite the long, unspoken truth that had lingered for months. My mother had passed away unexpectedly, and I wasn't there. I thought about calling her, but I had gotten so caught up in my life in the city. I had no idea how bad her condition had gotten. I had ignored her calls, not out of malice, but out of selfishness, convinced that I had more important things to do than face the reality of her aging and deteriorating health. When I arrived at the house, the familiar scent of my mother's cooking still lingered in the air. It had been years since I had smelled it, but it was as if the house itself was holding on to the past. The walls, the furniture, the small knickknacks that she had carefully placed on every surface, they all seemed frozen in time, as if they had been waiting for me to come back. I felt a pang of guilt when I walked into the living room. The family photos, the ones that had once made me feel warm and loved, now served as a reminder of how far I had drifted away from this life. The house seemed emptier now, quieter. I wasn't sure if it was the loss of my mother or just the fact that the family had been splintered in my absence. My older siblings, John and Elizabeth, had stayed behind, of course. They had worked hard to keep the house and family business running while I pursued my career. I couldn't blame them for being angry. But as I stood there, I couldn't help but wonder why I hadn't realized sooner how much I had missed by abandoning them. I hadn't even given it a second thought. My career was my focus, and I believed that if I achieved success, it would make up for the time I had lost. But now, standing in the house where I had grown up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I had built a life for myself in the city, but it came at the cost of my family's love and support. Asterisk, the will reading was scheduled for the following day. The atmosphere in the house was tense, thick with the unsaid words between us. I had assumed that my mother's estate would be divided equally between the three of us, as it had always been in my mind. After all, we were family. That was the rule: split everything equally, no questions asked. But when the lawyer read the will, I was stunned. It was a decision that no one had expected. My mother had left most of the estate to me. John and Elizabeth sat there in shocked silence, their faces pale. I could see the anger simmering beneath their calm exteriors. They had been the ones to stay behind and care for her, to nurse her through the last years of her life. And now, here I was, the one who had been absent, handed the wealth and property that should have been shared among us all. I could feel the tension building as their eyes turned to me, full of accusation. Elizabeth, always the more vocal of the two, was the first to speak. "Why her?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "We were the ones who took care of Mom. We did everything for her while you were off living your life. You didn't even visit her, and this is how she repays us." John, who was usually more reserved, stood up slowly, his face hardening with anger. "You weren't even here, Sarah. You weren't here when we needed you the most." Their words stung, and I couldn't find an answer. What could I say? How could I explain that I hadn't been there? How could I justify all the years I had spent focused solely on my own life, leaving them to carry the weight of the family alone? I felt like an intruder in my own home, and the inheritance, which had once seemed like a blessing, now felt like a curse. I wasn't sure if my mother had known how my siblings would react to her decision, but I wondered if she had hoped I would learn something from it. Something I hadn't understood before. Asterisk, the following days were filled with tension, anger, and resentment. John and Elizabeth refused to speak to me except for necessary matters regarding the estate. The house felt colder than ever, and my guilt grew heavier with each passing moment. But amid all the chaos, I started to go through my mother's things. There was something about holding her old possessions that made me feel closer to her. I found her old photo albums, and as I flipped through the pages, I saw images of a woman who had given so much for her family, her strength, her sacrifices, and her love for us all. Among the items I found was a letter, one that my mother had, written to me years ago, but had never sent. I opened it slowly, almost afraid of what it might say. In the letter, my mother expressed how proud she was of me, but also how deeply disappointed she was that I had chosen to prioritize my career over my family. "I've always been proud of you, Sarah," she wrote, "but don't forget where you come from. Don't forget who you are." There's more to life than work, more to love than success. The words hit me harder than I could have ever expected. I had always assumed that if I was successful, it would make up for everything else. I thought that by achieving everything I wanted, I could somehow earn my mother's approval. But her words shattered that illusion. She had wanted me to come back to be with the family, to love them the way they had loved me. I felt tears sting my eyes as I read the letter over and over. How had I missed it? How had I allowed myself to become so consumed by ambition that I had forgotten the very people who had always supported me? Asterisk, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The rift between me and my siblings was growing, and I was at the center of it. The inheritance wasn't the only issue, it was the years of neglect, the hurt that had built up over time. I couldn't just sit back and pretend it would all be okay. I needed to talk to John and Elizabeth to explain myself and hopefully find a way to make amends. But when I sat down with them, it became clear that the damage was already done. They were hurt and they felt betrayed, not just by my absence, but by my mother's decision. Do you think it's fair, Sarah? John asked, his voice tight with emotion. We've worked so hard to keep everything going, and you just waltz in and take everything. After all the years you've been gone, you think you deserve this? I never wanted any of this, I said, my voice shaking. I never asked for the inheritance. I never wanted to hurt you both. But I don't know how to fix what's broken. Between us, I don't know what to do. Elizabeth crossed her arms, her face set in a hard line. You can't fix it, Sarah. You can't just walk in and undo the damage you've caused. It was clear they weren't ready to forgive me. They weren't ready to see me as anything other than the sister who had abandoned them. And honestly, I didn't blame them. I had been selfish and I had hurt them. I had ignored their needs and taken them for granted, but I couldn't give up. I couldn't walk away and pretend everything was fine. I owed them more than that. Part 5, the unspoken truth over the following weeks. I continued to try to repair my relationship with John and Elizabeth. It wasn't easy. Every conversation felt like stepping through a minefield, and every word was met with suspicion and resentment. But as time went on, I started to realize something important. It wasn't the inheritance that had torn us apart. It was my absence, my failure to be there for them when they needed me the most. One day, after yet another argument with Elizabeth, I found myself standing alone in the living room, staring at the family photos. It hit me then. I had been so focused on my own success that I had completely ignored the importance of family. I had missed out on the most important moments of their lives, and now it was too late to make up for it, but I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't. Asterisk. Weeks passed, and the tension in the house became almost unbearable. I spent my days sorting through my mother's belongings, while John and Elizabeth buried themselves in the family business. We were all still living under the same roof, but it felt more like coexisting than actually being a family. The distance between us seemed unbridgeable, and every attempt I made to reach out was met with cold indifference or thinly veiled anger. One evening, after another long, silent dinner, I sat down with Elizabeth. She was the one who had been the most vocal in her frustration, the one who had made it clear just how much she resented my absence and the will that my mother had left behind. Elizabeth, please, I said, my voice shaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to try. I can't stand this silence between us. Elizabeth didn't say anything at first, her gaze fixed on the glass of water in front of her. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. You don't get it, do you, Sarah? She said, looking up at me. We didn't just lose Mom, Sarah. We lost you too. You were always the one who left us behind. And now you come back and everything has changed. It feels like you're trying to make up for everything with money. But that's not what we need. I never meant to make it about the money, I replied, my heart breaking at her words. I just wanted to make things right. I thought if I could fix the business, or if I could somehow make you see that I care, maybe it would make up for all the time I missed. Elizabeth sighed, rubbing her temples. It's not about fixing things, Sarah. It's about showing up. It's about being here, being part of the family. Money doesn't change the years we spent without you. It doesn't change the fact that Mom had to carry everything on her own while you were out there living your dream. It's too late for that now. Her words were like a slap to my face, but they were the truth. I hadn't been there. I had taken for granted the very people who had given me everything. I could feel the weight of my failures pressing down on me. But for the first time, I realized that this was the beginning of something, a painful but necessary journey. I wasn't going to fix things overnight, but I could start by listening. By showing up asterisk, the next few days were quiet, and I spent them working through the business side of my mother's estate. But the work was only a distraction. It didn't fill the emptiness I felt. I began to realize how much of the family legacy had been built by my mother and father. The house, the farm, the small business, everything had been a product of their hard work, their dedication to family. I was so far removed from that reality, focused only on my career, that I had lost sight of what truly mattered. It was time to take action. I didn't know how to make things right, but I had to try. I decided to make a gesture, a step forward, however small. I reached out to the local community that my mother had been so involved with, asking them to help me organize a memorial service in her honor. It wasn't much, but it was a way for me to show that I was committed to making up for my past mistakes. I wasn't sure if it would be enough to heal the wounds in my family, but it was a start. As I worked with the community, something unexpected happened. I began to reconnect with my roots. I started to understand the values my mother had held. Dear, the sense of community, of family, of belonging. It was more than just honoring her memory. It was about embracing the very essence of what she had taught me, even if it had taken me this long to realize it. Asterisk, the next breakthrough came with John. He had always been more reserved, more pragmatic than Elizabeth, but his pain was just as deep. After a particular long day of organizing the memorial service, I found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon. I joined him in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. Finally, he spoke. Sarah, I don't know what you want. From me, he said quietly. I don't know how you think we can fix this. But the truth is, I've been carrying this burden for years, and I'm tired. I sat down beside him, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. I never wanted to make things harder for you, John, I said softly. I never wanted to hurt anyone, but I did. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if I can. John looked at me, his face softening. You can't fix the past, Sarah, but you can start by showing us you're here. That you're really here, not just for the money or the business, but for us, for the family. It was the simplest request, yet it was the hardest one for me to fulfill. I had been so wrapped up in my own life, my own ambitions, that I had forgotten the importance of showing up. But John was right. I had to prove that I cared, not with words, but with actions. I'm here, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not going anywhere. Asterisk, as the day of the memorial arrived, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The community had come together in ways I hadn't expected. They had shared stories of my mother's kindness, her work in the community, her role as a mother and a friend. I was amazed by how many people had been touched by her, and it was then that I understood what she had truly left behind. It wasn't just the house or the money, it was the impact she had made on those around her. I stood in the back of the room, watching as people paid their respects. It wasn't about me or my inheritance. It was about my mother and the life she had led and the people she had helped. I realized that the most important thing I could do was to honor her memory, to carry on the legacy she had built. After the service, I found myself standing alone, staring at the photo of my mother that had been displayed on the podium. I felt a deep sense of loss, but also a sense of purpose. I wasn't just here to settle my mother's estate. I was here to reconnect with my family, with the community, and with the person I had once been before I let ambition take over. Asterisk, the journey of rebuilding my relationships with John and Elizabeth didn't end with the memorial. It was just the beginning. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. The anger, the bitterness, it was still there, but it was slowly being replaced by understanding and forgiveness. 1 afternoon, after weeks of working together, Elizabeth approached me. She was quieter than usual, her expression softer. "I don't know if we'll ever go back to how things were," she said, "but I want to try, for Mom, for us." I smiled, feeling the weight in my chest lift. "I want that too, Elizabeth. More than anything,